Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Greetings. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast.
Long live, what a classic.
Yes.
You
Friends.
are heralding the times of yore, of their victory, triumph, their calls of triumph. Beautiful.
Yes. Friends, today we have the American Shopping Party on, and we're going to hear about all the interesting stuff that they stand for and do. So let's get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
My name is Raghu Jufre, aka John Jufre. Grew up as a Hare Krishna kid, the oldest of the second generation of them. My mom sent me off to India to learn and study the Vedas. I was a preacher from 18 to about 26, and from that point on, an entrepreneurial junkie, from helicopter parts to putting together airlines for India to import-export business to $20 million worth of real estate in about 5 years between New York, California, anyway, nationally, and culminated with Raghunomics, which is now finishing up book number 18 of economic, social, political policy proposals. The American Shopping Party was the sort of the holding community center to begin presenting these proposals to the world.
Okay, so how did you come to start the American Shopping Party, and how did you arrive at that name?
So there's several factors in there. I'll tell you what motivated the first motivation of it, and then what the social political function, and what the theological upgrade to our political system today. So what motivated it was having discovered, this was book number 2, a simple solution to the 2004 real estate crisis, which was made of 2 components. The first of that was a mortgage program that would reduce everybody's mortgage 50%. So in LA, people are paying $5,000 a month for their home. This would cut it in half to $2,500, or those with $2,500 would drop down to $1,200, and those at $1,200 would be $600 a month. The formula was amusingly simple. It was in recognizing that about 20% of all the interest is paid in the first 4 years, 20 to 30% depending on the interest rate. So simply by passing that interest in that first 4 years, we were able to reduce payments by 25%. We added in a couple other additional simple steps, and lo and behold, it reduces everybody's mortgage 50%. So that was part 1. Part 2 was that in outlining the benefits of this, we came to discover that the bulk of Wall Street was made up, primarily, or especially so, of real estate, is made up of a series of duplicate financial products. So a mortgage, a securitized mortgage, a credit default swap, which is an interest on the mortgage, a second mortgage, and a PMI, which are basically the same thing. PMI is the insurance should a home default, and the second mortgage is made of that last 20% of the second mortgage. And derivatives, all which combined make about 12 separate financial Wall Street products. So what happened is twofold. The first is that a number of institutions wrote those quote-unquote liabilities off. So in an example of Lehman Brothers, they went from 800 billion down to 20 billion, I believe, in about 10 days or a week. So that's a write-down. So what nobody recognizes is that write-down was in fact a reduction against people's mortgages. And so if they would have then refinanced homes against all of these write-downs, we would have been able to have written off between 25 to as much as 75% of every mortgage in the US because it had already been written down by the banks. Instead, what happened is the US government stepped in, kept these financial institutions, the derivatives company, the credit defaults, the PMI insurance corporate holders, and it bought them all up. So right now, our federal deficit is made up starting of 5 trillion, probably closer to 10, maybe even $15 trillion worth of these duplicate financial products. And so that so-called $10 trillion worth of US deficits, if we were to refinance the house, all residential real estate in the US, we would be able to eliminate between 25 to 50% of that entire liability. And so the US government would instantly be able to erase, 5 to as much as $15 trillion worth of deficits. So you would now have people that have their mortgages cut in half, and US deficits would be cut between 20 to as much as 50%. So I decided to run for office here in Hawaii when the senator decided to run for governor, so his seat opened up. It was a special election. I thought, well, this would be a perfect occasion to go out and get media attention to announce this simple solution to the housing real estate crisis and the RADA mortgage, which stands for Real Estate Association for Depreciating Housing Assets. Of course, there is no media attention for third parties. So then I thought, well, let's give it a try. On the next one, I'll run as Republicans. Republicans have no chance of ever winning. So I thought, well, they might be receptive to giving me a spot in order to announce this. This would be international news that we just found a simple solution. It's really nothing more than an accounting mistake, is the way we framed it, which is to say that if you simply recognize the problem, that in of itself would instantly reset the markets. The biggest issue that we were facing in 2008 was nobody knew where the bottom was. This would put a floor on the market instantly, and that we could then begin building what to speak of refinancing and flushing out all the duplicate liabilities that actually are not a liability, they've already been paid off. So the Republicans were offended that somebody without Republican ideals would want to use their party to do what they viewed as a separate agenda from low taxes and smaller government. If that's their message, it doesn't matter that we could reduce mortgages, that we could reduce deficits. We would be able to supply people with 3 times the disposable income. So, of course, I lost the primary, and so I was shut out. And I was like, okay, in order for me to be able to make it past the primaries and be one of the last remaining candidates, I would need to start my own political party. And the expectation was that the media would then cover me because there's 90% or 80% of the candidates have been eliminated. And I don't know why I was entirely surprised, but of course, as a matter of principle, at least here in Hawaii, they do not cover third parties. All the media is already I don't even want to call it a backroom deal. Generally, they'll just tell you up front, we support our Democratic candidates, or in a few cases, Republicans. There is no room for discussion. So I was going through a great transition at that point. I just divorced, had no money, and I had to come and take care of things for my mom here. So I wasn't able to put in the kinds of time and resources in order to build it out. But it was at that point that I realized how extraordinarily critical it is to have third parties. And that is to be able to introduce conversations that are outside the two parties. And it just so happens that it appears that in a number of issues, as much as 90% of an issue is overlooked in the debates between the two political parties. And so then I realized that the American Shopping Party could provide that forum of conversation to be able to have a space to bring in new ideas that would actually serve to improve whatever the issue is dramatically. And so that brings me back to my first book of Reaganomics. So the ROTA mortgage and this idea of being able to reset the entire U.S. economy and eliminate 1/3 to as much as 50% of the U.S. deficits. That program was called leverage debt reduction, which is to say that when you pay off a securitized mortgage and you pay off a credit default swap, an insurance policy on a securitized mortgage, you've automatically paid off the derivative. You've already automatically paid off the government deficit, and you've paid off the homeowner's mortgage proportionally to it. So it means you pay off one, it automatically pays off its duplicate debts across the board. So that was two books, but the first book was called Lifestyle, is for what we refer to as lifestyle insurance. And this was an outgrowth of my days as a preacher. And I had just gotten back from India in 84, I believe. 84, it must have been 94. 94, 96. And Bill Clinton, the president at the time, had just come out against tobacco. And so we had all these headlines screaming that there was $100 billion being spent every year to cover the healthcare medical costs for smokers. Now, this is back when $100 billion actually used to be a lot of money. And I believe at the time that was the size of the gross national product of India. So you have 1.5 billion people who all combined is as much as what we're spending just on the healthcare for smokers. Now, being they call it virtue signaling. In my day, it was called a preacher. And I was like, well, if it's $100 billion a year, that's $1 trillion a decade. For smoking, how much would it cost for all the vices combined? And so I figured it'd run between $500 billion to $2 trillion a year. After I made some money in real estate, I took that money, I hired an economics group, and it took about 5 months to find them. This economics group is the go-to guy for all the bad boys. The Gaming Association of Atlanta, the Brewers of America, Liggett's, I believe it is, the largest tobacco company out of England. Economists that they go to do their numbers. And so the numbers coming from that organization would be indisputable. So I said, can you give me the numbers? And I said, we're the ones that do those numbers. That's easy to do. We're happy to do it. And he said, the problem is that there's such a variance between studies. You have the industry studies, which keep it very low, and then you have the critic study, which seems to inflate the numbers. So the way we handled that is take 4 to 6 studies, average it out. We'll start with the average, but then we'll also look at the low end and we'll look at the high end. And the thinking was that if we could come up with policy proposals that dealt with the high end, then you'd be able to handle every other scenario. So let me ask you this to give you an example of how dramatic it is. How much do you think America spends covering the healthcare of obesity-related services every decade?
I don't want to get too low on this, so how about $1 trillion?
Close, 2 trillion. Now,
2 trillion.
You got comfortable saying $1 trillion because I kept talking trillions, but we have a little video on it. We went and asked people, and it was hard for the brains to make it past like 40 billion or 80 billion or a couple hundred billion. And so when they would hear 2 trillion, just like the brains would just short circuit. And so to provide them a sense of context of how much 2 trillion is, that would be 300 aircraft carriers. So every decade. So in the last 30 years, it's 1,000 aircraft carriers just for obesity. So then I would ask them, what do you think is the cost if that expense was divided equally between all junk foods and fattening foods, soda pops, ice cream, pizzas? So if you're to buy a slice of pizza for $5, how much more would we have to pay in order to cover that cost? Remember, it's $2 trillion over the decade. And if it's divided up equally between every slice of pizza and every soda pop, what would the average cost be to cover that?
Extra $5?
So this is a typical response. You hear $2 trillion, you think it would cost between 50 to 200% the price of the item. And here's where the clincher is. It's only 10 cents. Right? You pay the 10 cents when you buy your $5 slice of pizza, and you now have universal health care for all of these related services for free. It is the world's single most affordable insurance premium. It's not a tax, it's an insurance premium. The difference being is the government sets the price of taxes, which has so much room for corruption. For example, with the cigarette tax, the cost per pack runs about $4 in social costs out of the 1 trillion a decade that it costs for them. Divided up equally runs about $4. But here in Hawaii, they are charging 10 and $12, and in New York, they'd gotten as high as 14. It's now 3 times the price. In addition to it, you're having to pay an additional 20 to as much as 40% on your health insurance premium. So out of that double charge on tobacco, practically none of it actually ever goes to the smokers. So now you have this government policy that's just gone in and just mercilessly pillaging the smokers because once they've been demonized, it justifies just sort of, what do you call it? Highway robbery. What's that word? Gouging. And so it took 60 years in order for the government to recognize that there's a price penalty, and now they've gone just over the top the other way. Insurance, on the other hand, the insurance company is allowed to charge exclusively for the price. You're not allowed to, you can throw some profit on top of it, 10, 20, 30%. The average is about 20%, and they scream bloody murder about the dreadful exploitation of insurance companies for that 20% difference. But it doesn't compare to, at least in this case of tobacco, how much higher and how much more the government will charge for it. So we're saying that there's 4 primary benefits of a lifestyle-related healthcare program. Number one is that 50% of all medical costs is lifestyle-related. So if we all covered our own lifestyle healthcare costs, we would be able to reduce our insurance premiums starting at 50%. Number two, one of the big advantages that lifestyle has is that it has a retail counterpart to finance it. So you have cigarettes for smokers, you have alcohol for drinkers, you have junk food for obesity. And so we can now remove 50% of the cost of our healthcare insurance premiums simply by people taking the responsibility for it. And that's how I had started the approach of it. And everyone's reaction was like, so when I first did this, again, this was in the 90s when the tobacco companies were the giants and everyone was like, the tobacco companies are never going to do it. Here we are today paying double or 3 times the price of their actual social costs. But the big issue was that nobody ever took a look to see what was involved with them paying it. So all I did was take a look at it. The long and short of all of this is that these are the kinds of discussions that are completely overlooked in the they call it was that duopoly, the 2-party system, but it's really just one party. It's the same companies, playing both sides of an issue, which seem to culminate with exactly the same result every time. Companies make more money, we lose benefits and are having to pay more money. So you have the Democrats that are insisting that government care is the way to go. You have the Republicans insisting that market-based healthcare is the way to go. They both know that lifestyle, almost without exception, most politicians know that lifestyle is 50% of the healthcare cost, as do a surprising number of the public. Somehow or other, somebody went around the country and educated everybody that lifestyle is really expensive, runs about 50%. You mentioned that to people, and they're like, yeah. So even though everybody knows this, nobody's taking a second look at it because the two parties aren't about healthcare. They're about using it to beat up on the other side. And Obamacare is the perfect example of it, wherein um, you had Obama, and I could see that a lot of Obama's confidence was that he was going to bring in democratic values with Republican approaches. And so his confidence was is that I'll be able to get both sides together. And so his healthcare is nothing more than Mitt Romney's healthcare proposal. And then, as a matter of political principle, if it is being presented by the other team, you have to sabotage it. So even though the Obamacare is really just a Republican healthcare proposal, they had to do everything they can to stymie and shut it down and resist it, as they did with everything else that Obama did. So we have this duopoly that won't look at any other alternatives, and even with their own policies made of the same think tanks, think tanks that are sponsored by the same corporate overlords. Even then, it's being sabotaged. And so this is where the political third parties can really play the critical difference, and that is opening up the conversation to a series of alternative inputs and approaches that is not possible. It is impossible for these two parties to do it. They have to maintain control. If you lose the majority in the House or in Congress, you lose your ability to be able to function. They have to keep the messaging really simple, and they have to do it on the basis of their principles. But this is what took us to, and this brings us to the theology. Really, what the issue is not even political corruption or incompetency. Really, the greatest problem is that the theology of the left and right, that paradigm of Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, that paradigm itself is outdated. And I realized what we need is a new theology that is representative of a modern world. These theologies hardly worked, 100, 150 years ago when they were invented. So as an example, what is the punchline of capitalism?
The punchline.
Yeah, so they say capitalism is based upon what?
Profit.
It's all about, what is it?
Profit.
Profit. So now we're in a world that is being led not by profit motive, but by market share motive. So you really saw this, in the 90s, and then especially in the early 2000s, 2000 to 2015, where all these new companies were coming in, all these new countries were coming in, and they weren't working for profit. They were working for market share. Toyota and the Japanese companies, they weren't working for profit. They were working for market share. Saudi Arabia had not cut their profit margin, but they had cut the cost. They had cut the cost to the point of a liability. They were losing money with every barrel they sold in order to destroy the competition. China was dumping. All these different countries were dumping their products in order to win market share at the expense of the rest of the companies, and those companies were primarily capitalist paradigm Western and American companies. And so the U.S. auto industry lost 50% of the industry. Quality was one, but also because it's profit geared versus market share based. So in the 21st century, with the economies of scale exponentially multiplied through technology, greater the market share, you have an exponential multiple on your price efficiencies and infrastructure to access and political sway, etc. So that capitalist model of profit is the bottom line is so outdated. And on the other side, You have socialism, capitalism, which is about sharing the profits of labor. Just when we are facing the final phase of automation. So both of those paradigms are completely outdated. And we used to be able to make up for these shortfalls, which were growing with each decade and each election cycle, with compromise. And the compromise was fueled by they used to be able to just bribe their, congressional or senators with, we'll give you an extra $1 billion to build, a library for, on your cousin's land, whatever the case is. They removed that, so now there's not even a financial ability to bribe the members of Congress to cooperate, and so all that's left is an outdated theology. So the American Shopping Party then decided to work to finding what are the baselines of a theology for a modern world. And so it was at that point that I realized that we don't have a political, social, or economic problem, but we have a philosophical one. And so I looked back to my roots, and my spiritual master, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, his birthday actually yesterday, he was all about self-sustainability, cottage industry, agrarian-based, and cow protection. And this interfaced really well with Gandhi's economic program. So Gandhi's economic program was the same thing: self-sustainability, local businesses versus those of Europe and England. And so that translated into the American Shopping Party. The American Shopping Party is just sort of fun and easy, and it interfaces with the highlights that everyone recognizes we want and need economically, let's speak of politically. And that is, we wanted to get 15% of the people to buy locally made or American made, we call it local American, 1 day a month and the first Friday of each month. 15% of Hawaii would be about 300,000. For California, that would be 6 million, and nationally, that would be 50 million. So we wanted to have this army of dedicated buyers for local American made 1 day a month. You show up with 50 million shoppers, every store is now going to carry something local American on that day. In Hawaii, it was a great place to start because we have 1.3 million residents against what used to be 10 million tourists. So if we could have gotten 20, with the speak of 40 or 50% of that 10 million tourists, that would be a 500% increase for local business, literally overnight. So the first was, this is our action step. The second was to find what we have in common cause. So what the result of having these outdated, what do they call them? What do they call the political philosophies?
Ideologies?
Ideologies. So now that we don't have compromise, and now that we are not able to bribe members of Congress, what's filling the gap for the shortfall of these ideological models is intransigency and fighting. And so everyone says that we need to get along. You're never going to be able to get along once you're working with, first of all, capitalism and communism, socialism was built in an era of antagonistic conflict. This idea of being able to get along was not part of the what do they call it? It wasn't in the genes. This whole idea of getting along, this is all new. Before, everything was done at the expense of other people. It used to be, just going and slaughtering each other, and then it became a ideological one, and so you had to defeat and crush the communists and the socialists. So this idea of getting along is just not in the genesis of those philosophies. So what's left is the only thing that's really left on the table is an ever higher level of screeching terror against the other party. It's not even about conflict anymore. It's really about how far can we terrorize each other. So the American Shopping Party recognized that we need to start where Gandhi started. So Gandhi got his uh, he got his schooling and what they call the lawyers back in the day.
Was it solicitors, barristers?
Barristers, I think it was a barrister. Anyway, he got that in England. He practiced in England, and he went to South Africa, and he got a small taste of organizing Indians. And then he went to India with his experience there. And I believe he had spent like a year or two just sort of taking note. And there was literally 1,000, not 1,000, there was like 1,000,001 issues to jump on the bandwagon with. So people don't recognize it. People look at India as a single country, but actually, the 26 states that comprise the United States of India are as dramatically different, if not more so, than the countries of Europe. So the difference between Germany and Spain and France and England to um, um, Italy, in terms of having a different language, having a different dress style, architecture, food, religion, that's as dramatic or more so in India. So you had that competition internally with those countries. They were actually different countries. And then you had the Muslim. I mean, it wasn't just you had the Punjabis with, and their issues with the Hindus, and then the center between all of those was the Hindu Muslims. And then on top of that was the British using everyone's divisiveness to exploit them, divide and conquer. So Gandhi was like, where do you start? And so he recognized that you need to find that one thing that brings everybody together. Do you happen to know what that one thing is that he used to unite the country?
That's a tough question. Is it that I can't venture an answer for that?
It was the Salt March. He went to the Muslims and he said, guys, you're having rice 3 times a day and you're putting salt on it, but it's illegal to get salt. The British have monopolized that business. So would you be willing to join me for a little walk to the beach, and we'll make the salt, and there's going to be so many of us that the British can't really do much about it. And it's like, sure, that sounds great. And then he went to the Hindus and said, hey, your Hindu brothers, our Muslim brothers are going to take a walk to the beach. You want to join us for that? And this will, thumbing our nose to England. And they're like, sure. And so the British are like, as if a little salt's going to, take down the might of the British Empire. And it did. Why?
They were economically dependent on it.
It took down the British Empire. Why were they able to successfully remove the British from India?
I've heard a lot of different theories about that, so I'm not sure how to answer that. It's a tough question.
First and foremost was because they started learning to work together. They found their common cause. And so what I found is that all the other political parties have two elements in them. The first is they're still made up of the same ideology as the outdated conservative versus liberal model. There's nothing new. So all they're talking about is that if we had a pure capitalism, which is outdated, or a pure socialism, which is outdated, we would be able to take care of our problems, but it won't work in a modern day. And we're just now beginning to have that, starting to wake up to it. It's like, we're not going to be able to pay people because there's going to be no jobs. And so what is the next step to that? So first of all, I haven't seen a political party, for the most part, that isn't based upon that ideological template. I mean, it's the difference between it's almost the difference between a rotary phone and an iPhone. That's how outdated it is. And then the second thing is that the bulk of it is based upon niche conflicts. That if we just push harder, so it's either one of those two, and generally both of those. American Shopping Party is saying, what is the updated version? of our ideological model. And so we found those, they're not middle grounds. It's not like these are the things that are slipping through the cracks. It's that in general, the so-called cracks represent between 40 to as much as 90% of any given issue that's just completely overlooked. So with healthcare, lifestyle 50%. In the case of pro-choice or pro-life, pro-choice is based upon something of a lifestyle, that my lifestyle and I want to have the freedom to do that. And pro-life is well, it's a moral quandary, and I'm just not going to take the life of my child. But about between 80 to 90% of the reason for an abortion is social economic. And so the pro-choice and pro-life sort of completely overlooked that 80% of the issue. And so we introduced the idea of pro-mom. What can we do to build out the social economic considerations wherein it becomes a true choice? Because right now, if the choice is I have a kid and I'm penalized intergenerationally with poverty, crime, and social uh, isolation, almost criminalized. Oh, you had a kid and you don't have a partner, stuff like that. Then that's not a choice. You're blackmailed into having the abortion in order to save, your kid from intergenerational crime and poverty. So we looked at a number of different models for that to start that conversation. So as an example, the Hawaiian model was grandma was the mom. So mom would have the kids, she would hand it over to grandma, and grandma had the social stature, had the maturity level, and had the economic stability to be able to take care of the kids. And so this left Hawaiians, I believe, as the first truly feminist movement in history. They were the most, pretty much one of the single most liberated women of any society, because all the social economic penalties had been removed by grandma stepping in to take care of the kids. And, by Western standards of the day, they were, that would have been a floozy, which is to say, they could have multiple partners. They could have, dads from kids from multiple dads, because there wasn't a economic penalty for them. Another one is the extended family. So here in Hawaii, you have the Filipino families, you have the somewhat the Chinese families, you have the Hawaiian families, Micronesians especially, but Polynesians in general. So when that 15-year-old girl has a kid, you got grandma and auntie and uncle and niece and nephew and brothers and sisters. And in India, I remember, because I was there for 5 years going to school, the moms had to fight the family off to okay, this is my kid, hands off. I want to get some time in with my kid. So again, it didn't have that isolation and penalty that women have here in a isolated, broken family culture, where the best case scenario is a core family. Rarely, if ever, is there an extended family to help step in and take care of them. So that extended family really is a really exceptional counterpart. Another one was Russia and France, where in both cases they are recognizing the population implosion. And so it began to highlight the value of having mothers for their people. And so they started extending an ever-growing number of benefits. And as Michael Moore said in his film, I forgot which one it was, he was saying, the welfare moms in France have stature. Here's a car, here's a great home. We'll send you, I think, maids, and they do your laundry for you. And, he's always so cheeky about it. But they were able to start recognizing the real value of motherhood. And then in India, they have the dowry system. And the idea of the dowry system is that you're buying the young newlywed couple 4 to 8 years of financial stability. And so you sort of see this repeated with cultures such as, the Jews. When somebody gets married, the community really comes together and they really help them with thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars to help them get started. So these are examples of other cultures that have dealt with the same issue that are not only very effective for almost any given time or situation, but are actually very prevalent here in the US. And it's not like you have to roll the program out as so much as empowering it and identifying it. So again, this was another issue. It doesn't have to get mired in the minefield of the pro-choice, pro-life, pro-choice, pro-life. We're calling it pro-mom. So this is the function that the American Shopping Party wanted to introduce. What are the third party considerations that are being overlooked and a forum resource center for it? What do we have in common cause? And I forgot what the third one was. So that is the American Shopping Party. And you could have seen what a big difference it would have made. We had 30 million small businesses as of a year and a half ago, anywhere between a minimum, from what I understand, of 30%, and in a number of places, 50% of all small businesses have now closed. And we're now beginning to see, for the first time, the lifestyle quality of life that they were adding to our communities and to our life. And so we're beginning protective of it. So more than ever, this idea of coming together in common cause, positively, with a forum without the political minefields and ideological antagonism, with simple, very effective, and far-reaching economic impacts. So those are that was sort of a summary of the American Shopping Party.
So here's a question. Since Gandhi, as you were mentioning his story, you mentioned how he was able to unite people by the common cause. They had a common enemy. So some people would say that a nation needs a common enemy. Do you see that as necessary, or was that just a particular in Gandhi's situation?
Well, actually, it was different because Gandhi was trying to show them that the issue about the British conquerors or the Muslim Hindu intergenerational conflict was really secondary to finding the positives of what they were about. And what these excuse me. So so he wasn't preaching nonviolent. Oh, so let's just talk a little bit more about Gandhi and his nonviolence and non-cooperation, civil disobedience. Those were part 2 and 3, and so everyone jumps to civil disobedience or nonviolence. Step 1 was getting everybody on the same page. So I just want to sort of backtrack a little bit to the American Shopping Party. So our principles are: number 1, we have no negatives. Whatever it is you don't like, find the positive alternative of it, and we'll help promote that. Number 2, we only work with what 90% of the people agree with. So as an example, if we could take 50 million people and plant 20 trees, that's 500 million trees. And we could do it in like 3 hours, one afternoon. 45 bucks would take care of about 50% of all higher education, the cost of higher education. So the idea is that we'd get together one day a month, and 1 month we would take care of planting the trees. The next month we would take care of our college kids. The next month after that would take care of our seniors and our vets and our home gardens. And then, and so we'd come together in common cause with the fun things that are extremely productive. And so that is what Gandhi was able to do. So we have a 6-point pledge. Number 1, commitment to buy locally made on that one day a month. And like in Hawaii, you could see what the multiplier of that was. Number 2 is to ask 3 friends and family to join you. That's the grassroots. We need grassroots. It's about reaching out and finding our common bonds. Number 3 is to ask a store, please show me your locally made. That's the outreach to the community. Number 4 is to wear something locally made. This is where it really kicks in, both as a practitioner, you look in your closet and you'll find that you have like 4 things that are locally made. And the flip side is that a lot of the local stuff is like accessories. the hats and scarves and the jewelry and things like that. And then number six, number five is making something with your hands. So every month, 1 month it will be um, making pottery. Oh, I mean, this pandemic really just sort of summarized it. How is it that something that takes literally 2 minutes to make a mask, to sew a mask, we were dependent on China to provide us the masks? I mean, that's just absurd. The level of incompetency. So we should all have like a little sewing machine in our home, and you know, 1 month we'll all make shirts. Next month we'll all make masks. Next month we'll make dresses or whatever the case is. Anyway, things with our hands really bring back the culture of arts and crafts and artisanship. And last but not least is $20. $20 times the 300,000 residents here in Hawaii would be 6 million, which would allow us to throw the hottest party here in Hawaii every month. Of course, for California, that's almost $150 million, and nationally, at $20 times 50 million people is $1 billion. So again, just a small contribution. So this comprised of the Gandhi Revolution, which is we take the individual responsibility to be there for our businesses. We reach out to our friends and family to join us. We ask the businesses to join us. In Gandhi's case, he was saying no British goods. In our case, it's not about no against anything. It's about on this one day, we want to highlight our local. It's not in opposition to anything. It's about empowerment of who we are. And then, again, the same thing, keeping track of what we own and celebrate that on that day by wearing it. And then what can we do to start building out our handcrafts? So these are all Gandhi-esque programs with that. And you don't need an enemy to do it. And in fact, so this brings us to number 4. We punish through irrelevancy. We're not here to, attack anybody or tell them how horrible they are. We just want to empower those things that are representative of what we are. So really, the American Shopping Party is just a sort of a funner, bigger, easier version of the Gandhi Revolution.
Huh.
No
That's
enemies required.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. No enemies, you said?
I said no enemies required for this one.
Okay.
All the other political parties, without exception, they have to have their enemy. So what shut us down in this last election? Was working with a buddy. He put together just an amazing team, and we had a grand event, and we were going to use that event for our fundraiser. And his brain short-circuited. He got a little tweak. He erased everything, so we couldn't do our fundraiser. So then we chose a presidential candidate, Brock Pierce, a billionaire child star, Hollywood child star, who's made his money off the crypto and seemed like a tech guy. He was very excited. He was going to come to Hawaii. He was going to campaign with us for, originally he was talking about 2 weeks and down to 1 week. And then the pandemic came in and said, if he comes, you're going to be in lockdown for 10 days, and he couldn't afford that time. And so because he didn't come, we just never ended up getting him. So originally he was talking about putting in $50,000 cash to help, build out the American Shopping Party infrastructure, with another consideration of $1 million worth of pledges of shoppers, without him coming here and actually getting the experience firsthand and creating the stir here and seeing how popular we lost him. So then I hired a company to do our website. They charged us for 2 months, and they never did anything. And to my surprise, the bank just decided to pay it, and so we're just financially shut down. So the problem that we were having with launching the American Shopping Party was, what did I say, the product of your own success? People's response to buying local goes from sort of like, of course, to like a fervor, radical, like, oh, I already do that, that's great, let's do it. And so the problem was is that I just get run over. So if I try to launch without having that back office system in place, I would have just got, I just, if I can't respond to them and I have no place to put them, and it's data intensive. We need a website that would coordinate the retailers to the member buyers, to the product lines, to the producers alongside the event. So each of those is like its own data platform, and we need a program that would bring all five of those together. So I just wasn't able to pull that together. So I never bothered trying to launch because there's no question of being able to get the people. So when I first started this, I thought I was going to have to go out and educate the public about the value of buying local. I thought I was going to have to get educate the local businesses to get on board, and then try to find manufacturers and highlight them and drive them through government programs and incentives. It was just the opposite. I was totally blown away by the fervor of buying local and American. Like, they spend more money, they'll go out of their way, they'll take more time to buy it, and they do this regularly. And so at first I thought, well, 15% is just sort of a good place to start. I would say that there's a minimum of 15% of the people that already take this extra time, money, or effort to buy local or American. And in a number of places, so over in Honolulu, it runs about 35 to 45%. Here on the Big Island of Hawaii, which is the different than what people think of Hawaii, which is Honolulu. On the Big Island, it starts at about 50%, 50 to 60%. When you get down to Puna, which is sort of like, the hippie farmer countryside of the island, it runs like 80 to 90%. And that's true with a number of places throughout the country. And so we would need a platform that would start at 50 million people, but probably by the end of the year, it would be like 200 or 300 million people. So I just haven't been able to find a platform yet to plug people into. And so I just didn't campaign in addition to the limitations imposed by the lockdown. So I will consider relaunching the American Shopping Party nationally if I can get that partnership. So I'm looking to maybe sell my house. They'll give me about $200,000 in order to put into the platform, and that should be enough of a platform to then reach out to get supporters. So we only need 50,000 people to get $1 million worth of financing. So I think we can get 50,000 people in a relatively a matter of weeks. Like, who's ready to buy local one day a month? Let me ask you this: would you make a commitment to buy locally made one day a month?
That is a good question. It's definitely one of my goals. It's one of the things I want to do more of, and I'm pushing myself. Now, it's a difficult situation if you are low on money. So if you only have $5 to spend and you need groceries, it's very hard to not go to one of the big chains. So that is tough. So depending on how that's worded, it's a good value that I want to support. In some circumstances I'm in sometimes, it makes it challenging. So it would be an aspiration. How would that sound?
Well, this was actually a common refrain from a number of people. And again, I forgot to tell you the other side of, I said I'm going to have to go and educate the shoppers, the retailers, and the producers. And here's what I found. Number one, there was an overwhelming response from the shoppers. So I talked to like union guys, for example, and they would just be like, stuttering with thrill and excitement about how they wanted to do this. Just as an interesting side note, I said, let's talk to your union head, and all of them just shut down. Like, somehow or other, in their minds, unions wouldn't back this. And that was just a very interesting phenomenon. And then I did a march from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia by foot, no money. And just as a side note, and I was, to my surprise, it was Trump voters that were all about this. This was, 2016, first time I had the American Shopping Party on the ballot. It was Trump voters, and I just couldn't understand why, like, the Democrats were just sort of a little reserved about jumping on with such enthusiasm. Anyway, so the buyer, there is a very strong buyer already there. And then when I approached the small businesses, what I found out is that when we talk about buying local or American, 70% of that is small business. And so it's a pet peeve of theirs that like they get no extra brownie points for all the extra expense and time and effort it takes in order to provide this local stuff or American made. And then the third thing I discovered was just how much is actually made in America. We're Once you assembled it at all, it's actually quite surprising how much is there. And now for the final clinch to the whole deal, increasingly we're becoming price competitive. So the American Shopping Party would basically just pull the curtain back on the reservations that you have to discover how much variety is there, how many outlets are offering it, and how increasingly price competitive it's becoming. And so the idea with the American Shopping Party is that we could go to these small businesses, find what their hottest product line is, and then try to scale that one product line. So rather than it just being every local American made product in their store, we would take one. And then if we could scale it, I think the sort of rule of thumb is that the price drops, I think it's 5 or 7% for every time it doubles. So if you can quadruple the volume, you can drop the price by 20 to 30%. And at that point, you're pretty well price competitive with outside imports.
So how do the small businesses get that volume? Because that's one thing they struggle with, is having the volume.
So that's where the American Shopping Party was becoming a resource center. That was the other side of it. So in addition to a platform that would coordinate buyer, retailer, manufacturer, product line, and event, inevitably we're going to have to become a resource center. So I thought that would be, I could tag team with like a small business service. And that's where this became our political demand from the politicians. So what we wanted out of the system was we had 5 simple demands. Number one, we wanted 1% of the government budget to go to small business and farmers. So that doesn't sound like a lot, but in Hawaii, that's actually $2 billion, which is just through the roof of, a capital pool for like, we would be able to triple the volume of all small businesses. I went to a number of small businesses. So one was a cacao farmer. And I said, so like how much money, if you could get the money as a combination of loan and grant, how much would you want? And like, as I'm finishing the sentence, she says $100,000. I said, what would $100,000 do? And I said, of that 100,000, how much would be a grant? How much would be loan? She said, about 25,000 grant and about 75 loan. And I said, what would that do for you? She said, I would get a cacao processor. And I said, so what would that do for your business? She said, it would start at double, probably triple, possibly quadruple my business. I talked to a jeweler, and same thing, 25, 35,000 grant and 65, 75 loan. And he said it wasn't like a doubling or tripling, it was like a tenfold. So what I was the pattern I was starting to see is that the smallest amounts of money have an exponential multiple for increased business for small businesses, especially in a place like Hawaii where we had the tourism market. So we wanted to go to the state and say, guys, it's 1%. It's 1% of your budget. You gotta put in 1% for our farmers and our small businesses. And when I would say this to because I had to get the signatures from people, you could see eyes getting red with just being pissed off that they're not even giving 1% for farmers and small business. Number two, that it is a state function this one day a month. Number three, that they help. So as an example, the big hotspot for the tourists was Honolulu, especially Waikiki and Ala Moana. So Ala Moana is one of the highest end and highly visited tourist centers in the world. So we would have our local farmers in there probably every weekend rather than just one day. So that would the state would cover the airfare, would cover the booth spot, would cover the advertising, and provide the loans in order to scale up for them being at Ala Moana. So you have the Japanese girl coming in and she sees the little local farmer there, showing them how to process the cacao and has a little name of their chocolate bar. And then that brings us to number three, which is that the Japanese girl, goes back to Japan, and of course she's met the farmer, and so she's now a long-term consumer. So number three was that the state, as an extension of their budgets, in addition to cash on top, to help build out the export market. And number four, so everyone's like, well, the state's never, there's never enough money. If we triple the state budget, which I believe is, what is the state budget? Is 2 billion or 1.5 billion a year, whatever the case might be. If you tripled that, they still wouldn't have enough money, because it's all these special interests where all the money goes to, and like small businesses are always left out of the loop. So rather than just waiting for the government to give the money, number four is that we would get a tax credit against taxes paid for the last 5 to 10 years by the small business and their employees. Because the fact is, the government doesn't actually have money. The money is actually coming in from businesses, and especially small businesses. All the big businesses get all the advantages and pay no taxes. All the small businesses get all the liabilities and have to, pay the full tax plus penalties. So the money's coming from small businesses anyway. We don't actually need the government to give them the money. So if you simply provided this tax recognition, they would be able to get the money that they needed outside the government. So we don't need to go through the bureaucracy of the government to get the money. So those were the four demands of this election for Hawaii.
So this can work in other states as well then, huh?
Well, I think that it's not so much that it can as so what I was really after was to get Trump's attention. So they're like, nominate Trump as as your party candidate. And the problem was that none of them would guarantee getting this in front of Trump. I only needed to get enough media attention to get Trump's, Trump's attention, and he would have gotten us 80 million followers in a matter of hours. Now, with Trump jumping on, I could then go and beat up on the Democrats. It's like, guys, come on, you're supposed to be like the union and the workers and small businesses. You can't let Trump steal the show here. And then we could have gotten the Democrats to get, their 80 million people, and we would have now had half the country on board to buy locally made by using the naturally inbuilt antagonism for defeating and crushing and outdoing the other political party. And we could have done it for small business. And so I was hoping I could do that by Christmas so that we could have had I was going to call it an American Christmas, where we come together as one country to celebrate the best of who we are as one people on that one day. And that still gives us 29 days to beat up on each other. We can get back to the gladiator sports of conflict politics, but at one day a month, we should have a timeout. And what I wanted to do for November, I was going to call it Black Friday, American Black Friday. And that would be dedicated to African-American businesses and causes, and to see if we could raise $150 billion between purchases, donations, and government grants for the African-American community. And so every month we had different themes. We could have Europeans, and we could have Asians, and then we could have South American. And in addition to that, there would be 4 states highlighted each month as well. And so we would have a unique experience and a one-time special. You can't get it any other time. And this is really what retailing is about now. It's about that experience and a specialty, sort of commemorative and one of a kind. So it'd really be able to build that out. So originally we were thinking of calling it, or we sort of referred to it as the Amazon of patriotism. But I came to recognize that really patriotism is only one category. The actual category is moral retail or moral consumption. And so that could either be about environmental or moral value, moral retail value. That we're now, the new luxury is morality. That this is made by unions, or this is made by local women out in Guatemala, or this is made with companies that have the latest environmental technologies to produce their products, or it's made of recycled goods. And so this morality is the new luxury item of this generation. And so that's what the American Shopping Party.
Sounds good. It's an idea I've not come across before. You do have a very original approach to a party.
So this is from directly taken from my childhood training, Gandhi Revolution, and as my spiritual master, Prabhupada's economic plan. So it's just repackaging it that just so happens to have an ever-growing level of relevancy and urgency. It's gone from relevant to urgent. And we'll see what the good Lord has in mind. So far, the sabotage has been intense, and the personal struggles on my side. I'm the sole caretaker for my 78-year-old mom. We had a tenant, didn't pay for 5 months. We almost went broke. It took about a year and a half to almost recover from that financially, among other personal challenges, and sabotage such as, the Designity company just stealing my entire budget, basically. So I had no money left to be able to help with my business and launching it.
So how can you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just that. So I'm, one thing that really inspired me was this governor, the California governor special election. Like, if I could have run for that one, I would have won. I mean, because I grew up in LA. I was there for on and off for probably about 15 years over the last nearly 50. Because I was born in LA, third generation Italian American. So I know all the issues. So with water, the idea was that we should be pumping water in from the melting glaciers out in Greenland, and instead of having iron pipelines, inflatable ones made by DuPont. I wanted to reach out to DuPont. Once they're inflatable, and I think I've cracked the code of what can make them as strong as the cement and iron, but still have the flexibility of the inflatable. And so you could just be laying, 100, 200 miles of these inflatables. And you can basically be drop shipping them from like helicopters and just roll them out and inflate them as you go along. And there's so many advantages. And the idea originally actually wasn't to take care of the water issues of California, but rather 80% of the horrific disasters of global warming is the melting ice caps. So once that desalinates the salt levels of our oceans and rises the ocean levels, that's where the bulk of the harm is done. So if we can intervene at that water going into the oceans, we might be able to sidestep various levels of that disaster. And there's no reason why DuPont can't produce these inflatable. I mean, it's a relatively simple little addition that should make them both as hard. It's already flexible, so this should make it as hard and as straight as cement. And so the idea is that when we have these glaciers melting or going into the ocean, that would be preempted by pumping that water out. And there's plenty of places, in the world that could use it, from the China's desert to India's desert to the African desert to the Australian desert to America's deserts, to speak of LA. So serious as we are, we should put in $250 billion to $500 billion building out these pipelines. And because they're portable and they're modular. If it's causing some kind of environmental damage, we can just move them literally in a matter of days. All the liabilities that we're getting with um, gas pipelines, you can sidestep. There's a number of safety features I recognize could be added to it. So we could use it for oil, but it's really about pumping water in. They talked about the fires. I mean, it is absurd that we would have fires that we can't put out in a matter of minutes. And so when I was there in LA back in the 80s, I was like, we should just have a fleet of 200 to 500 airplanes as a paid for by countries from around the world. And whenever there's a fire disaster, we were able to deliver 300 to 500 airplanes. And what, or how, if we need 5,000 airplanes, whatever the case is, to be able to put out any size fire in a matter of minutes. And especially for a freaking city next to the ocean. It's absurd. You have the ocean right there and you can't figure out how to put the fire out. There's just such backwards thinking. Anyway, to have this fleet, every country and every county in the U.S., every state would chip in a monthly insurance premium for this fire brigade, this air fire brigade. Immigration. So the first policy proposal I'd come up with was actually inspired in the 1980s when Governor Wilson was running again. Low numbers. There was no way he was going to win. And then it was the first time I got to see demagoguery, which means to demonize, innocent victims. He just went after the immigrants and like, oh, these immigrants are like destroying California. By a hair's width, he won the election. Simply by terrorizing, the California public about how horrible immigrants were. So I spent about 2 years studying the issue from that election cycle. And the punchline I realized was based upon the distance from immigrant organizations, that immigrants were paying more money than they were taking because, they're getting these they're getting these social security numbers and then having to pay full taxes and insurance premiums, but getting none of the benefits. So I'm like, well, that's a relatively easy equation to work out. If they paid, if they're already used to paying for those benefits anyway, just have them formalize paying for it, and then they've made a contribution. So I took it to Professor Hinojosa from UCLA. He was so impressed with my work. He said, if you get your GDP, I'll get you into UCLA. And that was a whole nother. So because I grew up in India, I was, at 18, I was in India, I was a little Buddhist monk studying the Vedas. I never went registered with the draft. And so without registering with the draft, you can't get financial aid. So it took them a year so I started going to UCLA, and it took them a year to get back to me and say, sorry, you don't qualify, you never registered. And at that point, I was so broke, I was biking an hour and a half from Culver City to Santa Monica College. I was spending 3 hours biking to and from the college, and then I was spending about an hour and 15 to the Beverly Center, working there at Macy's. Of course, it was only 20 minutes going downhill, but it was like, an hour and 15 going up. So I didn't make enough money to even cover the cost of the books. I had no money to take the bus. That's the reason I started biking. So anyway, I just fell so far behind because I couldn't afford it. But anyway, that would have gotten me a ticket into UCLA, sponsored by this professor. And so then I started doing the numbers on it. So the policy proposal was called Pay and Stay Securely. And the idea is like just charge the immigrants up front for the benefits they're going to take, and then they'll still pay the same taxes and benefits that the employers were paying on their behalf, quote unquote, fraudulently, but now they'll be paid up front. So this will do wonders for the local economy. So you'd now have cities, states, and counties competing to be able to get this big cash infusion from the immigrants that we're now paying up front. So who are the sponsors for it? And so the first place I started, of course, was Mexico. As Trump said, oh, we're going to have Mexico pay for it. And why would they want to do it? So one of the numbers that really caught my attention is the $100 billion a year, and this is from about 10 years ago. It's probably higher now. Sent in remittances of money to their family back home. So it's 100 billion for all immigrants. For Mexico, it's 35 billion a year. So I'm like, okay, that's a huge number, and that's only in increments of one to two, maybe $300 a month. Just a little bit of petty cash, 35 billion a year. In other words, it's the smallest amount of money in the immigration equation. So I was like, well, if Mexico were to match that, then in other words, a Mexican sends in $300, and Mexico will match that $300 to their family to start help building out that family's area, and that America matched that 35 billion. That's $100 billion a year. That is $1 trillion a decade. So now Mexico's putting in 350 billion, but they're getting $1 trillion worth of cash infusion. The immigrants putting in $200 or $300, and they're getting $900 total for that, for the investment. And America's putting in $350 billion, but they're getting $1 trillion also, because they're getting the same money right back from the immigrant, because the immigrant is paying that money up front. So everyone's walking off with more money. And remember that $1 trillion so Mexico now has a new $1 trillion asset from the smallest volume, the smallest capital revenues of the immigration system. In other words, the amount of money that they're spending on rent, the amount of money that they're spending on food, et cetera, is significantly more than that. So then who's the parties that would, so then I was like, okay, who are the parties that would be interested in also helping sponsor them? You have academic institutions, you have employers, you have political organizations, you have activist organizations, you have personal, you have communities, Hispanic communities will be there for their Hispanic. You have people that are just moved by them. So I identified 12 different organizations, and they would help sponsor in addition to Mexico. And so now you've just monetized. Monetize simply means that you've taken the 5 or 10 years worth of economic activity of any given thing and sort of paid for it up front. So America, on the one side, America would now be getting trillions of dollars paid up front at the local level and state level. And Mexico, as an example, would have now monetized its entire labor force. A country like the Philippines, I mean, again, they would walk off with trillions of dollars monetizing their workforce up front. And so these are trillions of dollars worth of new assets. So the great thing about immigration is that it's a completely fully developed ecosystem internationally. It remains to actually be probably the world's single greatest infrastructure per capita of manpower and money. And it's just not been monetized. So the pay and stay immigration proposal would instantly monetize between starting at 200 trillion, probably closer to $500 billion to potentially $1 quadrillion worth of a new ecosystem economic program that could be activated instantly, because it's all the moving parts are already in place and fully developed. So that's immigration. Housing is like, oh my God, housing is just, I don't want to say it's the funnest, but it's just so the reason why I started this whole political activism was to highlight what the RADA mortgage would do for the housing market and what it would do for our deficits, federal deficits. And so when the governor thing came up, again, I'm just, so financially strapped here. I've been working to try to refinance the house, and there's always a new reason why they can't do it. I've been able to do so, I would have jumped into the mix there. But the RADA mortgage would reduce every Californian's mortgage 50%. So now there's three folds. Number one, they get more disposable income. Number two, it's deflationary. And number three, we would be able to take a huge amount of liability off the table. And they keep talking about I haven't really seen anything that's deflationary in terms of an economic policy. All the proposals, whether it's tax cuts or higher salaries or more benefits, they're all inflationary. So it just so happens that whatever stimulus is going in generally is less significant and exponentially less as time goes on than the penalty of inflation. Inflation is just a theory to this generation. They've never experienced hyperinflation, and so it has no meaning to them, and it won't have any meaning until they're paying $100 for a loaf of bread, and the house that you want to stay at costs $30,000. Only then will they recognize the virulency and urgency and dreadfulness of hyperinflation. Anyway, because we've reduced the amount of money in circulation through this house paying off the house, we were able to give people more spending money, but it's deflationary because the amount of money that was reduced off the mortgage is significantly more than the money extra petty cash that they have that they're spending. So it's deflationary. So that was step one. So I wanted to run. The great news about this is that I had already pre-sold it. So I was taking it around to banks and governments back in 2008. And there was one bank that was like, we are ready to go with it. And it's a financial institution called La Raza. And they're the largest financial institution for Latinos in the US. And the bank president is Tommy Espinoza. And he loved it. He was ready to run with it. But the point person that I had met at that point was a political American foundation, a political organization. And they said the optics of having an immigration group lead this wouldn't look good in the anti-immigrant sentiments of the times. So they shut him down and they snubbed him. And so he's never approached it since then. So all I would need to do in my run for governor is to create the public outcry and outreach to Tommy to say, Tommy, please run with this. And he would be able to hit all the Hispanic families throughout the country immediately. So it's already been pre-sold. We just need to get him back online. So that was step one. Step two was to be able to assemble every consideration and resource for homelessness in a 30-day period. So what sort of kicked off that idea for me was actually Kevin, was it Hafferty? Meet Kevin, love the guy. And his idea is that if he is governor, he'll declare a state of emergency. And what I've noticed about all elections is they always talk about what they're going to do after they're elected. I would like to start making a political system where you do it before you get elected, and if you deliver, then you get elected. And so I wanted to call for the National Guard come in. And what we would do is we'd bring all the homeless to City Hall. And at City Hall, we would assemble every resource from government, state, city, county, and local, and of the marketplace and of nonprofits. And they would all be centered in one place. And there's just so much overlap that on the one side, and there's so much resource on the other, that if you brought them all into one place, they would be significantly more effective with less effort because there's a lot of duplication. They have an area of specialty, but they're duplicating a lot of the other services that other places are. You bring them all into one place, one center like that, it would really multiply the strength, and they wouldn't have to take care of the other areas of paperwork. So you'd have the churches there, you would have the Social Security services that are there, you would have the drug rehab programs there, you'd have the security issues. And then as a third step, you would have the technologies for housing. And what I realized is that, again, our housing architecture is about 50 years outdated. There's no reason, like, it's absurd that we have homes that are getting blown away by hurricanes or flooded out or burned. So we look back at this sort of backwardness of people making grass huts, because they blow over, mold, and it's so outdated. Well, the architectural things that we're working with today are just completely outdated. And nothing personified this better and proved, I think, as the simple solution to housing. I believe it's called Boxable. I have to go look up their name again. They're absolutely amazing. They can set up a fully furnished, outfitted house in 1 hour. They're portable, they fold up and they fold out. And they come fully outfitted electrically with plumbing. They have the stove, the refrigerator, the washer and dryer, and if I remember, and the sink. And if I remember correctly, it also has the furniture in some of their models. And you fold it out, it's turnkey, it's ready to go. If and when you're done with it, you fold it back up, takes another hour. And so I realized this is the centerpiece of the housing technology. And so I believe there's like $2 to $4 billion, I can't remember what the number is, that was already given to help alleviate the homeless, the homeless issue, and people that are overextended on their rents. I would take that entire $2 to $4 billion and try to double it. So we have about a budget of $5 to $8 billion, and ramp up the production for this company to starting at 50,000 units a month. I believe that this should be at about 1 million. They should be at about 300,000 units per month, because there's about 5 million new housing. I believe it's new housing units. It's either 5 million total sales or 5 million new housing units, and then like an additional 3 of old housing units. Whatever the case is, 20 to 30% of that should be of these, so we can roll it out on demand instantly. And that whatever county and city regulations that any county has, they need to include that to be able to they have to include that in this new what do you call those, transformer homes. And they just roll them out, and there's no reason. So at first I thought it was really about housing, but it actually isn't. Our inability to be able to build on demand is 70% of the reason for our economic collapse from this pandemic. So do you remember why they had the lockdown to begin with? What set the whole lockdown off?
To stop the virus from spreading.
Not to stop it from spreading. It's the same number of people that were going to get it.
To keep the hospitals.
Yes.
To limit
it
the
was
number
to bend the curve. In other words, the same number of people are going to get it, but it just wouldn't all bottleneck and overwhelm the hospital. And this remains to highlight one of the single greatest bottlenecks of government, which is they always slow things down to match their incompetency rather than coming up to speed with the demands of the time. And so basically we shut down, I can't remember what it is. What is it? $8 trillion or $17 trillion worth of economic activity. I don't know if that was for the country or the world. But anyway, we shut down $18 trillion worth of economic activity, so we wouldn't have to build $500 billion worth of new medical centers. And what we're actually we're giving accommodation to the dysfunctions of our healthcare system. So in New York, for example, if I remember correctly, it was 140 beds for 16 million people. So is that like a 1.5% or 1%? Go ahead, go and make and what they're expecting would happen is they were going to need like 300,000 beds. They're going to need like twice as many or 3 times as many. So they shut down the entire multi-trillion-dollar economy of New York rather than putting in a couple more buildings and getting another 200 beds. So, but for 200 beds, New York lost whatever it was, $5 trillion. And the centerpiece of that wasn't just the hospital beds, but it was putting in these new buildings. So then I realized this building, not just housing, but this building is sitting centerpiece to a number of so-called failings or problems that we have, whether it's immigration, whether it's homelessness, whether it is hospitals. And so this really should take center stage. And I think that in 30 days, bring in the National Guard, index all the resources of uh, of programs and services and agencies and companies that can take care of the homeless, and first and foremost scale up Boxable. I believe it's Boxable. I think it's the name. Uh, and there's no reason why we cannot, if they want to. So what's happening is they're going to, in the next 60 days, they're going to have all these people evicted, let them be evicted, and then put them into these new Boxable homes. And what that will do is automatically bring down the extreme cost of housing. You introduce the ROTA mortgage, which will allow all these landlords to cut their mortgages in half, and based upon the requirement that they also rent them out at 50% less, and we will have a surplus of housing literally in 120 days. So that's the housing, that's the fires, that's the water, that's immigration.
That's a good approach. That's a good approach. So how can our audience out there support your party, and where can they find your books?
I'm going to start posting the books. Of the 18 books, 8 of them are online on lulu.com, but I'm going to start posting them to the only internet presence I have right now is on Facebook, called American Shopping Party, and Ragunomics, Raghu, Raghu, it's East Indian, nomics, and that's where my works are posted right now. I did get qualified for a $25,000 loan, so if that goes through, I should be able to afford a little something to put towards a website. So I'm hoping I can have that up for the next month or two. I have right now, book 17 is called The Tesla Report, Age of the Million Mile Warranty. So if they go to Ragonomics on Facebook, they will see the latest one. And the punchline there is that the Tesla, the million mile battery announcement that Tesla made, the stainless steel body, and Tesla insurance, along with the electric engine, should allow them a million mile warranty. And the advantage of the million mile warranty is 30-year financing. And what 30-year financing will do is that $40,000 Cybertruck would run $139 a month, which sounds like a little, but for Tesla, they would get almost $250,000 by year 30 with that model. So they'll get 5 times more money if they went with the 30-year financing once you've included co-pays, insurance, warranty, and upgrades. And so this really, that sounds like a lot of money to buyers, that they're going to spend $250,000 for their truck, but that actually only comes out to 25 cents a mile, which is 70% less than what we pay per mile today. So Tesla will have a truck that requires no or little down payment. It's 70% of the monthly payments, and is 5 times more revenue, while the buyer is a smaller payment, smaller monthly payments, and is saving 70 cents on a per mile basis. So it's pretty hot, and I'm waiting to finish the video on that and release that. We're hoping to get Elon Musk's attention with that one. But then I thought, okay, basically what we've done is we've created a true membership model. The problem that the auto industry is having in trying to create a membership model is that the monthly is just too high. You might as well just buy it for the price of the. So a lease and the rental models are only going out 5, at most 8 years. So the real magic happens at 30 years or at least 15 years, which means about 500,000 miles. And so it's like, well, okay, if GM were to, convert over to this at least 10, if not 15-year warranty, this 300 to 500,000 mile warranty, and get everybody on that $300 a month, 350, their revenue, and 80% of the car, let's say they have 200 million cars on the road that would take that membership, GM would go from $150 billion a year, which is what they make today selling new cars, to 500, $500 billion a year in membership fees. So this will be a redo of the auto industry, while at the same time be the official announcement to the end of the ICE auto, internal combustion engine, petroleum based, because Tesla is going to be able to provide a warranty that is 10 times the $100,000 warranty that the auto industry is offering today. Anyway, so that's all that is posted there on Ragonomics. Below that one is leverage debt reduction, of how we could pay off $5 to $15 trillion of our federal deficits by simply refinancing today's homeowners' mortgages, especially that's even without using the RADA mortgage program. And I'm getting ready to post book number 18, which is, and this is transportation, ILEV, which stands for individual levitation. So many people have heard of, do you know what a magnetic levitation train is?
No.
So it rides on a magnetic level. It floats through a magnetic levitation. So the magnets push the train off the track, and so it rides about 3 inches off the track from this magnetic air pocket, and they travel 200 to 300 miles an hour. And so what we're posing is that if you can run a 70-ton train at 200 to 300 miles an hour, you should have no problem running a 700-pound, 200 times lighter, a 200-pound individual autocraft. A little 3-wheeler that then, once it gets onto this rail system, would now levitate and go 100 miles in town and 200 to 300 miles in between town. So this would do wonders for the auto industry. They would now have consumers that would want they'd probably be able to sell 1 billion of these in the next 5 years. Everyone's going to want one. Basically, it's a little airplane for a couple $100 a month. It's 90% the footprint. It's basically a roller coaster, but instead of being 4 wide, it's going to be 1. So just 1 person. So it's very light. You'll be able to fit 10 of these autocrafts in the space of 2 cars. So we'll be able to reduce. They keep talking about building underground or building more freeways, but we actually can just reduce the size of the vehicle and accomplish the same thing, and it would be 70% the size, the footprint, the speed. It would be 70% faster. It would cost 70% less, and it would be 70% smaller. So I'll be posting that probably in the next week or so. And then the next one is finishing up my outline for, had I run for governor, what those outlines, everything that we just talked about, from transportation to immigration to fires to water to the big highlight of that one is the magic bullet to government ineptitude and corruption. And this would take care of 80% of all of those issues. And it's called government priced markets. So whatever the government is charging for a service, if you provide the same service, you would get 50%. You'd be able to cash in at 50% for that same service. So the cost for homelessness, for example, runs about between $80,000 to $150,000. So if you take the same homeless person and provide them shelter, you would now be guaranteed $60,000. Right now, it costs $300,000 to $500,000 to provide public transportation per person. If you do it, then you'd be able to get it. You get $100,000 per person that you provided to the public transportation. Because the government inefficiency there is so extreme. And so this is what I was going to introduce for California. If you can do it for less than government, if you can provide the same service the government is trying to provide, you're guaranteed 50%. And if the government can't cover it, then you'll get it in tax credits. And if you take it in tax credits rather than cash, then we'll give you a 20% bonus on top of that. So the whole thing would be financed up front. And the inefficiencies of government is just absolutely mind-boggling. The first of which is just, they call it crony capitalism, but it isn't. It's actually crony socialism, where in the name of in public services, socialism, you're just tag teaming with your circle of buddies. And the way it works isn't just that they take, anywhere between 60 to 90% of the budgets for these public services, but that they do so. It's like 20% getting the contract to begin with isn't enough for them. Then they have to take like 50% or 100%, and generally that's not enough. They have to charge like 2 or 3 or 4 or 500% more than what the actual cost is. So there's the entitlement that, of course, I'm going to get 80% of the budget, and then on top of it, the contempt that, of course, I will only do it if I get 200 or 500% more. And this is true of every government building. Somebody's brother, niece, uncle, or business associate, owns the land, if not the building that is being contracted. The housing here in Hawaii, for example, the market value is like $900, but with the specially connected, they were able to get county housing to pay them $1,700. And this is true of all government services. So that crony socialism is an extraordinary inefficiency. So to beat it becomes relatively easy. Another one is, like I said, government always slowing everything down in order to match them, their incompetency, rather than them coming up to speed with what needs to be done. And the best example, of course, was the virus. Rather than just coming up with a few more hospitals and hospital beds, they decided to shut down tens of trillions of dollars worth of economic activity rather than just building some hospitals. Anyway, the list goes on of different areas. Another one is political sabotage, because the other side's doing it. You have to shut them down. So this adds to the cost and the time frame of doing it. Another one is making things idiot-proof. What better example than 9/11? So there, the government was being informed. It was on the president's desk. They're going to, ram some planes into the buildings. You should be on the lookout for it. Meanwhile, out in Florida, like, these guys are learning how to, take off with the plane, but they're not letting. So, and they're Muslims, and this is a red flag. They didn't follow through with that one. Russia was there. You're probably going to get hit with planes. There's a terrorism plot. They weren't able to follow that one. So then they came out with making our security idiot-proof, which means that 99% of the people and situations that are not a threat all have to be made idiot-proof, because the president couldn't figure out that we're going to be attacked by a tourist, even though the report was on his desk and he was told so. So this idiot-proofing things adds an extraordinary price to getting the job done. Another big one is the success of failure. So every time government fails, the reward for failure is just through the roof. So the VA fails, so now they get 3 times as much money. Our schools fail, they get 3 times as much money. So whatever the real reward comes from failure with government. Anyway, so whatever the different scenarios of government failing, the punchline is that adds more price to the finished product. And so what I would have done as a California governor is that if you can provide the same service, you get 50% of that price. And it does 2 things. It allows you to sidestep trying to correct the corruption. You can't. If there's any hint that you would stop that corruption, they'll shut you down. So the media and the politicians and the bankers and the business community, they're all in on the game, and they have 1,000 ways to shut you down. So you don't want to play with the Godfather. As Jesus Christ said, what did he say? Give unto the mafia don. What is the mafia dons? Back in the day, they called them the Caesar. It's sort of the same thing. So, I don't want to try to stop the mafia. Like, I'm Italian. Like, you don't play with the Godfather. And this wouldn't really impinge on what they're doing. They can still, have their projects of corruption, but it will allow the marketplace to begin building out alternatives to it without infringing on the corruption. So that was really the centerpiece of the campaign. The RADA mortgage, the housing, the portable, the inflatable pipeline, the ILEV, maglevs. The maglevs is magnetic levitation. The transportation system, people would pay about 10 cents a mile versus the 17 is what we calculated. Oil companies would be offering one-third the price, one-third the profits that they get out of oil. So that way we get the oil company buy-in to it. And that we would now issue dollars against the Meglev, and it would be used on the Meglev, so it would be deflationary.
That sounds good. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the Maglev transportation system is a duplicate of the petrodollar, but the petrodollar is it's just very loosely correlated to the petroleum, and now it's now printed up far beyond oil produced. Whereas with the maglev levitation freeway system, it would be issued against each mile produced. So it'd be a closed, a very tightly produced financial system, currency system. And it would, right now, the petrodollar is against about 20 or 30% of the oil produced, whereas in our case, the mag dollar would be against 100% of the miles driven. So it's a much broader asset than the petrodollar. It would also then include the real estate next to it, and it would include the retail to it. So we think that we'd be able to, the mag dollar would be able to provide a asset value between 3 to as much as 10 times of the asset value that the petrodollar is offering with the ICE engine model today. So anyway, that's the run for governor. That's the American Shopping Party, and that is Reaganomics.
Excellent. Our audience can go there. So we want to thank you for coming on our show and sharing all your ideas with us. Our audience, I trust, will love hearing about those ideas.
Well, let me just say that this is personifying the urgent need for third parties. These kinds of ideas. I'm not attached to any of these proposals. These proposals are simply working models to start a new discussion. And this is the reason why we need to have long-lived third parties.
Yes, exactly. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for taking your time out of your day. And all the best to you and your party.
Have a beautiful week. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Big aloha from the Big Island of Hawaii.
Take care. Bye now.